and welcome to The One Show with Matt Baker.
And Alex Jones. Now, the biggest teen idol in the world at the moment is Justin Bieber. No contest.
No. Wherever he goes, his fans, the Beliebers, follow in their screaming droves. Now, look at these pictures from Liverpool recently as police try their hardest to keep them under control.
But let me tell you, the 17-year-old Bieber has nothing on tonight's guest. Now, in 1973, these were the staggering scenes when he flew out of Britain after a series of sell-out concerts. Absolutely remarkable.
Amazing. For a generation who won't remember Cassidy Mania, tonight's guest is, of course, David Cassidy.
Oh, lovely to see you, David. Thanks for stopping by. Wow. That's the longest applause we've ever had.
Oh, stop. I haven't seen that particular footage, but I remember it well.
Yeah.
I had just played, well, I played Wembley, and I had broken the Stones record there, and I came back and played White City Stadium, and I constantly remind myself that almost everywhere that I played back in the 70s, they blow up.
Right.
Main Road, gone. New Main Road. White City Stadium, gone.
Well, you're actually sat in White City Stadium now because this is where our studio is. Would you believe it?
Really?
So you're back. Yeah, here he goes.
And he's got the fans here. Give us a scream, girls.
Yeah, the
fans. Oh, stop.
And David, you're in town for a one-off gig that you're doing.
I am. I'm in town for a one-off gig, and I actually went on my website and said, look, it's been 40 years, and there are very few people in their lifetime that are blessed enough and lucky enough to have a career that, like mine, that's been, very diversified. I played on Broadway 3 times. I've been in the West End twice. I did over 2,000 shows in Vegas. And during that period of time, I never sang any of my hits. So I'm going on the road, and I've been on the road in the U.S. and also around the world a few years ago. And it's just, it's an emotional thing for me. And I mean that sincerely. I'm not, you know, it's not the TV emotion. It's the real thing.
Yeah.
To have it.
Sorry, David, we'll have a little chat about that a bit later on.
All right, all right. Okay. You can interrupt me anytime. I go on and on and on
and on. As long as we know. Now, David is actually a racehorse owner and breeder too.
I am indeed.
So we'll be very interested to find out later what he makes of what happened at Aintree on Saturday.
I will.
This year's Grand National was more controversial than ever.
That's it, they're off and running. They set off on this 4.5-mile journey, 30 fences ahead of them.
So also is Oscar time as they come to number 4. Calgary Bayer's gone, Orneo's gone. And then Dooley's Gates is down, West End Rocker has gone at Beaches, the t'other one is down, All Right, the Samoza is also gone.
Bella Briggs with 100 yards left to go. Bella Briggs and Donald McCain. It's the McCain family back with another national. Bella Briggs, Jason McGuire, the winner.
Now, former jockey and broadcaster Bruff Scott is here. Bruff, it's not just animal activists that are kicking off after Saturday. You know, ordinary people were devastated at seeing the pictures we saw. Do you understand the horror?
I've been part of the horror. I mean, I was in a pile-up 1965.
Yeah, but you know how people felt watching.
95?
65. 65. But no, if you have horses, which I do, and have had all my life, if you're being a jockey, it is the worst thing that can happen. And much more, you know it can happen. I always have very mixed feelings. This is not a strange dilemma for me the day after the Grand National. The morning of the Grand National, I have a dilemma. I see horses going out there, and you can't be sure. I mean, last year they were all right. The year before they were all right. 2 years this time, they didn't make it. Always that danger.
I heard 3.
Two were killed, but you know.
Well, euthanized, yeah.
Yeah, well, one was euthanized and one broke his neck.
All right, I wasn't here. I was in the U.S.
But the fact is, the Grand National is the most exciting, most challenging, and the most dangerous event.
No question about it.
And the big question you have to say is, are we, if we have horses, do we have the right to put horses to the test? That's the issue which animal activists say, and I accept their concern and everyone's concern, but I believe that it is right to take up the challenge.
I disagree.
You disagree?
And I'll tell you why I disagree. I've been breeding and racing thoroughbred racehorses in America, where we have very little jump racing, right? Now, your jump racing is so incredibly challenging, and you know this as well as I. Over the last 20, 25 years, the breakdowns, serious breakdowns of horses, because we breed for speed. We breed horses who do not because of medication. And I disagree with almost all of it.
Remember, we have clean medication rules.
I know.
I mean, interesting, but the safety...
Yeah.
You have drugs that we don't, you see.
But you have horses who have been bred in the United States and all over the world where they are stallions and mares who have had medication. Now, I am a huge fan of yours. I've watched your broadcasts for 20 years. I'm being conservative, just to make you feel a little better.
I presented the Greyhound Derby here in 1975.
Wow.
In White City.
But interesting...
In White City. Now, but I just want to make this point. We're talking about horses and animals who I love the event. You know, I love racing with a passion, like more than anyone. We do very little jump racing in America for that very reason. Jump racing, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's wrong, but the Grand National, due to the unsoundness of our horses now, and the breeding programs that go on, which I'm a part of, has gotten so unsound.
Well, can I come back to you? Because we're talking about the Grand National.
Sure.
The horse that won, Briggs, he was brought into this world to do that. And I mean, rightly or wrongly, we bring horses into this world, and, you know, we take responsibility for them. He is a magnificent great horse. He's not an American horse, he's an Irish horse. Yeah. He was bred, he's been reared, he's been trained to take on these tests.
I get that. But
and look, he passed it, some didn't.
Yeah.
But
it will go on and on and on.
But the fact is, if you're involved in it, you're taking the risk.
It's my passion.
You're putting a horse at the risk as
Guys, sorry, you've got two very different opinions. There's a very interesting debate.
Actually, we don't. You know, the opinion is, in my opinion, they need to lower some of the fences just a bit. Yeah, because
then you go too fast, you turn it quicker.
Well, you may be right about
carry on in the
we don't have a Grand National.
We're going to have to carry on. Sorry, David.
That's all right. I'm a big fan of his, and I want you to know I have such respect for you. And I mean,
thanks, Brett, for coming in.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you too.
Now, 30 years ago, we had a royal wedding, public spending cuts, and people taken to the streets in protest.
Yeah, how times have changed.
1981, the year of the riot in Britain. 2 years into the Thatcher Revolution, rising unemployment, frustration with the government, and racial tension boils over onto the streets of Toxteth, Handsworth, and Bristol St Paul's.
But it all kicked off in Brixton, and what happened here over 4 days 30 years ago would transform the way we're policed.
Unemployment nationally was heading for 3 million, but in Brixton, 50% of young black men were jobless.
We want better opportunities! We are frustrated and we are fed up!
The black community felt unfairly targeted by police who had extensive powers to stop and search at will under the contentious Sus Law.
The week before it all happened, my mother was shopping in Brixton and had her handbag searched by 3 young plainclothes policemen. She's a woman of nearly 70 at the time. So, you know, they weren't targeting any criminals, it was about intimidating the black community.
The police I joined around 10 years ago is very different to the one that patrolled the streets back in 1981. Back then, you wouldn't have found many mixed-race guys like me in the Met.
To clamp down on street crime in Brixton, police launched Operation Swamp. In just 6 days, they stopped nearly 1,000 people. They arrested 118. Finally, one incident between police and an injured young man was the spark for the mounting tension to explode. Peter Blexley was among the first police officers on the scene.
The police regarded themselves as the gatekeepers of all things to do with law and order, and that any uprising would be suppressed and kept down. And we naively thought that that was going to work on that Friday afternoon.
Which is the polar opposite of what we have today when they're talking about neighbourhood police and listening to the concerns of the community almost.
The police response the next day was to flood the area with hundreds of officers, a show of strength designed to restore order. It did the opposite. Over that April weekend, 65 civilians and 300 police officers were injured. The government ordered an official inquiry, with respected Judge Lord Scarman at the helm. Though he looked every inch an establishment figure, Lord Scarman was prepared to uncover some uncomfortable truths. Scarman's final report was a revelation for many in authority. It said the Brixton riots were a natural outburst of pent-up resentment fuelled by serious mistrust of the police.
Some people were disappointed that Lord Scarman stopped short of calling the police force institutionally racist.
His main recommendations: recruit more ethnic minority officers, change how the law is enforced, and work harder on community relations. 30 years after their days on opposite sides of the barricades, Peter and Devon meet for the first time.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Peter Blexley.
Devon Thomas. It was pretty grim in those days. The only time you'd see me in discourse with a policeman was down at police station trying to get somebody out of custody. And not very nice discourse either.
I mean, the police have moved on a lot, in my experience.
Yeah, yep.
And of course, we had the Police and Criminal Evidence Act,
Sure,
which of course virtually eliminated
all those bad
sus
practices.
abuses
Yes.
overnight.
Sure.
So hurrah to that.
Sure. And there's a coherent consultative process that has actual influence over what police do in operational terms.
Yeah.
That didn't exist then.
Things did change after the Scarman report. Within 4 years, we had the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and the Police Complaints Authority. Coppers now had to answer for their actions.
The Brixton riots were not a planned political event. It was more of a case of a community in spasm. Understanding why was perhaps Leslie Scarman's greatest legacy.
Brian Paddock is here. Brian, you were a young sergeant, weren't you, in Brixton in those times. Now, recently, police have been criticised a bit of their handling of recent demonstrations. How do you think it's changed then over the last 30 years?
Well, in those days, it was like an army of occupation in Brixton. It was the police versus the local people. Now, hopefully, it's more like all the good guys, the police and the local community on the same side. So much less chance of having a riot. But now we're much more professional. The police are much more professional in the way that they deal with these sorts of demonstrations.
Yeah, well, one thing that's certainly changed, looking at the earlier pictures with the actual uniform, with the gear, I mean, just looking at the actual protective clothing that policemen were wearing back in '81 and comparing that with the protective gear now, I mean, it must give more confidence, of course.
I mean, we had the plastic shields, but, you know, ordinary police helmet, no flame-proof overalls like they have now, and these sort of crash helmets, those ordinary police helmets didn't offer any protection at all, really, back in '81.
Yeah.
And of course, the Royal Wedding is coming up. Now, you were the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Met, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you feel that the police are prepared for anything that could happen on the day?
Absolutely, and much easier than policing, you know, like the student protests we've seen, because you don't have to balance the right to protest against security. It's all about security for the Royal Wedding. We know where the routes are going to be. Yes, there might be a problem with a terrorist threat, maybe, but the police will be liaising with the security services, and hopefully everything will go like clockwork.
Let's hope so.
Brilliant, let's hope so. Thank you very much, Brian, thank you.
Great.
Now, as David is here, I think it's only fair that we admit our teenage crushes, isn't it? So mine was Jason Donovan. He covered my bedroom wall. That's very normal. Pamela Anderson?
I'm not going to call it a crush, but I did have a picture of this person on my wall. This is Valery Lukin, a Russian gymnast. It's more hero worship.
Oh,
and,
boy.
Yeah, he's brilliant. First
Brilliant.
guy ever to do a triple back on floor.
Didn't expect that.
Absolutely amazing.
OK, but our very own Cary Grant only had eyes for our David here.
Wait.
Back in the 70s, the name on everyone's lips and the man who had the key to our teenage hearts was David Cassidy.
But I wasn't the only girl to have his posters all over my bedroom walls. In fact, there were 30 million people who were part of the fan club. That's more than the Beatles and Elvis Presley.
I think I love you.
The single, I Think I Love You, was the biggest selling song of 1970 and sparked a generation of devoted admirers who savoured and cherished every David Cassidy moment.
I woke up in love this morning.
Wendy Wright is still a mad fan. I wonder how far her celebrity crush goes.
So this is your memorabilia room. I love it, I have to say. What did you feel when you first got into him?
I fell in love, I think, just there and then. It was just... Yes, he really is everything that the magazines had made me think he was going to be. But the music is the soundtrack of my life. I can relate huge events in my life. There's always a David Cassidy track seems to be somewhere in the background of it.
I'm just a daydreamer.
Take me back to 1974.
This is the concert ticket from White City Stadium.
Describe the week leading up to the gig.
Every single outfit in the wardrobe was taken out and tried on at least 5 times before I could decide what was going to be the right clothes to wear, just in case, because David would be seeing me, obviously, and would know how special I was when he saw me. So it was really important that I had the pink top or the blue top, because that could make a big difference in our future. And suddenly there were thousands and thousands and thousands of girls there. The excitement was palpable. You really could feel it. It was an electricity in the air.
That day, a young girl was crushed due to the hysteria of the 34,000 frenzied fans. She later died. Now, I know in here you've got a sort of report of your day, which I love the idea that you even did this.
David sang his last song, said goodbye and ran off. We were all pleading with David to come back, but nothing happened. Ness and I stood there. All I could say was, he can't have gone. Then I started to cry. The feeling inside me was awful. David had gone. I might never see him again.
I've come to speak to psychologist Linda Papadopoulos to try and make some sense of these powerful infatuations of idols like David.
I think the way that boy bands have developed over the years have been very much about, you know, helping girls believe this fantasy that it is about them. You know, he's singing to you. Think back to the times of Elvis and David Cassidy, sort of the idea that they don't have a girlfriend because he's waiting for you. You know, they're not married because, you know, you haven't, you know, hasn't met you yet.
Oh, chatting to Linda and Wendy reminds me of those great early moments of youth where you have your teenage crush and your first love. They're great bonding experiences for us as women, and also a great opportunity to remember our youth. I mean, obviously we do have to grow up sometime, that's a fact. But hey, what's wrong with still holding out a flame for your teenage idol?
And of course, well, no, Wendy's here with a group of huge fans, feeling slightly embarrassed now, having poured her heart out in front of David.
Sweet you are. That is, no, I mean it. That's really touching for me. You have no idea, and it means so much to me to have fans like Wendy. I mean,
yeah,
I'm so blessed, and the reason I'm here in the UK is to celebrate my birthday, and that's tomorrow evening, and I'm gonna release 100 tickets tonight for those who couldn't get tickets, or from what we call scalpers or touts, who bought so many of them, making 200, 300 pounds on tickets. And it's for people like Wendy and all of you fantastic fans. And I really wanted it to be for you. I put it up on my website. And anyway, it's a blessing to be able to be me and to have people like yourselves who have supported me. And I hadn't come here for 10 years at a time. Yeah. And to know that you have been so incredibly loyal to me.
You know, when it all started, David, when did you suddenly realise that, you know, you'd left a TV show and you'd become a massive star?
Well, I was on the TV show in America, and I was very, very successful overnight. And I mean, it was almost overnight.
Yeah.
My record, I Think I Love You, was the first single. And
how did that affect you? It must have been a real shock.
Well, the first 3 weeks, it went from nowhere to like #5, and then in America, nobody does that. Certainly an unknown artist. And then the next week, it stayed there for like 6 weeks. It went to #1, and the album, they had never sold $500 worth of albums. That's $250,000. The record company I was with, they sold 3.7 million copies. So if you can imagine how overwhelmed they were, they weren't prepared for it. And quite frankly, nor was I. I was 19 when I sang that song, and it's one of the greatest pop songs ever written, in my opinion. Yeah. And I didn't write it, but I wish I had. And I came in as a young actor. I'd been playing in blues bands and all kinds of different music than I did as an actor in that role, playing that part. And it was difficult for me in the beginning to grasp the magnitude of how many people it touched all over the world. And, you know,
it must have been.
It was beyond what anyone's comprehension. I got to know John Lennon quite well.
But
he and Elvis was his guy. John and Paul and George and Ringo were mine. I picked up an electric guitar the night after I saw them on a Sunday night television show in America called The Ed Sullivan Show, which all the big pop stars, especially the British Invasion. And it changed my life, and I still miss John. He was kind of a mentor to me. And Paul, I played with him, I played with John a few times, and it was a thrill for me of a lifetime because they were, until my arrival there and here and then all over the world, and John paid me the greatest compliment. He said, "You're the biggest thing that's ever been."
God.
And I thought, no, I'll never change the world the way you did. I'll have an impact on a generation and then another, but it's changed my life and in the greatest way it could possibly
be. And then, David, obviously you stopped touring big stadiums eventually and went on to start and create shows in Vegas then.
I did, and on Broadway and in the West End, and I wrote and produced a number of shows and 2 movies. I created and produced a television series for a network in the United States. But, you know, when you get pigeonholed and you become that famous and that successful, people want to keep you there. And people thought for the longest time I didn't love being that character and that experience. I mean, I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, I promise you, for 5 years and toured all over the world. And it's the equity that you have when you've touched so many people's lives that's why they're here.
And they're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night, I'm releasing 100 tickets.
At, my word, that's an interesting shot there. That's a very interesting shot.
Well, HMV Hammersmith tomorrow, right now.
Okay.
Putting 100 tickets on sale that I saved.
Well, good luck with that, David.
Thank you, love.
Brilliant.
Thank you
we've certainly seen some very odd things on the one show, like we're about to see now.
Tonight, Rennie from Switzerland and a David Cassidy knickers.
Oh, no.
Yes,
Oh, no.
Yes.
And
oh,
now
no.
We're going to bring you a very interesting story, David. You're
no.
going to love this. It's of historic fish and a bunch of llamas.
There are few British animals hardy enough to live in the far-flung extremities of the UK. But our rarest freshwater fish, the vendace, is definitely one of them.
The vendace is a rarely seen relic from the Ice Age, living only in very cold, very deep water, like up here in the Lake District. It used to be common in the UK, but now only a handful of populations exist, and even those are under threat.
A specialist team from the Environmental Agency have been studying vendace since the early 90s, but Alistair Driver is worried they could soon be lost forever.
There's quite a lot of pressure on these rare fish. They're very sensitive species. They rely on cold water. They're very sensitive to pollution. And because we're getting more extreme storm events, and because slowly the water temperatures are warming up with climate change, we now know that we've got to do something to try and save these very fragile fish.
So they've reared thousands of vendace fry in captivity, and Andy Gowans has a batch of 20,000 ready to be released to help repopulate the species.
On each of these bottles is about 4,000 or 5,000 vendace fry. These are just newly hatched, so they're very, very small, but they're ready to go up the hill now.
They're so tiny. You can hardly see them. They're amazing. And where are they going?
We're going to take them up to Sprinkling Tarn, which is up behind the large rock behind us.
And why put them back up there? Why not release them where they came from?
If the water temperatures rise significantly in the future, then vendace might become threatened by that. So by taking them up to Sprinkling Tarn, where it's going to be a lot colder, we're buying an element of future-proofing.
So their new location is going to be colder, it's going to be cleaner, and a really good place to set up a new population of vendace.
Exactly, yeah.
So, how do you transport 20,000 fish high up into the hills?
Well, there are no roads, and even the path's not terribly great. But we do have some other help on hand.
Right.
Llamas have been used to help carry loads in the rugged Andean mountains for over 4,000 years. And they're certainly more environmental than an off-road vehicle, and a lot cheaper than a helicopter.
Well, I have to say, I'm glad I'm not carrying those water bottles. I've only done 100 yards, I'm already out of puff. Onwards and upwards. Come on then, Bilby.
A llama can carry up to 30% of its own body weight, and they're well adapted to the mountain environment.
He's got this very thick, shaggy, woolly coat, which is great insulation. And he's got these big eyes set on either side of his head, which gives him a great view all around when we're navigating these narrow little paths.
Right.
And Andy and I have to do our share of the carrying too.
Oh, come can't believe the place that we're dropping the fish is so extreme. It's so far flung that actually the llamas aren't even going to make it up there.
Unfortunately, so we'll have to carry in the last little bit.
That sucks, doesn't it? And I need to butch up a bit. All right?
Let's go.
Thanks, we do. Crazy.
Negotiating the tight tracks and loose scree, we reach the high altitude lake, 609 metres above sea level, sprinkling tarn.
What an amazing sport.
It makes the hike worthwhile.
Very lucky, well looked after fish.
And very fussy to need to come here in the first place.
Absolutely. Right, so is this a good spot to
Yeah,
let them go?
this is as good as any, yeah.
The fry will reach about 25 centimetres long in 4 or 5 years' time. But before they're released, we must check the water temperature is just right so it doesn't shock the Vendace.
It's about 9 degrees. Too cold to swim. Oof. Rather them than me. Right, the big moment. What we've waited all day for. Let these little guys go. Be free. It's fantastic. They're just swimming off straight out, aren't they?
Straight for the deep water.